Let's start now with the application overview, the first topic of the presentation, and begin with the spooky stats. So about 43% of people who apply to MD schools will get in each cycle. And when you put this over the number of applicants, about 60,000 applied in 2024 and 25,800 will matriculate. This can be a very daunting number, but with the right assistance, you can be in that positive matriculating number. Now, if you're considering DO, the rate is similar, actually a little bit lower in the 30s. There's usually about 27 to 28,000 applicants, and around 8,000, 9,000 will matriculate. So still similar in that it's extremely competitive, DO or MD, for acceptance. Now, beyond the acceptance rate numbers, the application costs can also deter people. So starting with the MCAT costs $320, and the resources, though, they will heavily exceed this. Your more affordable ones will be AAMC material, UWorld, or Khan Academy, which is essentially free to about $300. But tutoring and other advanced resources can be thousands of dollars. Now, the fee for the Casper exam, which is a personality exam, this one is only around $85, and the resources, you can honestly use free resources, and you will be just fine for this exam. For the application, the primary application costs about $175, but each additional school designation beyond the first one is an additional $45, and you will likely be applying to a lot more schools than one. And your secondary cost is going to be around $100 per application. So the cost can really tally up fast to well over $5,000. With that said, many students are going to apply to 15, 20 schools, and I do recommend applying to more, especially if you're applying to a lot of New York or California schools because they're so competitive. I just recommend erring on the side of caution because you never know where you have a chance. For example, I didn't think I was going to get into NYU. I'm going next year, and the amount of applicants has steadily risen since 1980, and there was a large jump following COVID, so make sure to apply. So I also wanted to be transparent about my stats. So my GPA was a 3.93, my MCAT was a 521, and my Casper was in the top quartile. But all the schools I interviewed for, they didn't require the Casper. With that said, these stats are strong, but I think the things that really helped me were my community service, my time in internships, and definitely my years as a student athlete, as that was all that was talked about really during my interview sessions. Now let's move into some of the numbers for my application. Starting with my primary application sent, I sent 26 total. 31% were in the top 10, as I thought I would be a competitive applicant. 15% were in my home state of North Carolina, and 12% were from my current state of Ohio. Now, I likely would have had more schools from home state and current state if I lived in California, New York, or Texas. And I filled out the rest of my primaries with schools that I thought were a good fit for me geographically, and also schools that matched or were a little bit under my stats. For secondaries that I sent out within 2 weeks, I sent out 19 total within 2 weeks of receiving the secondary, and that really was to show my interest. With that said, I sent 22 secondaries total, and that wasn't the full amount of secondaries I got. I got 26 of them, 4 I just thought after some further research, they weren't quite for me. As for interview invites, I had 5 total between September and January with 3 acceptances, and I got some acceptances October 15th and then all the way through December, and then I had 2 waitlists. So let's then move into general application preparation and talk about some things that I think led to my acceptance, starting with the fact that I focused on my strengths. So throughout my full college experience, I tried to make my strengths, as in traits, like my leadership show. And I showcased them through my athletics and making sure that I tried to get to a leadership position, and also through community service and becoming a president of a club, really highlighting those strengths. Now, also, I made sure to explore a variety of fields beyond just shadowing, such as pharmaceutical industry with Eli Lilly and medical devices with Medtronic. This showed that I was fully set on medicine and allowed me to give more perspective on different sides of medicine. I also emphasized community service on my application as it was central to my experience and my interests. I've never been one to push people towards just doing any random community service or honestly like free labor, right? Rather than benefiting a community. So early on in my college experience, I made sure to think about what I cared about, what mattered to me and made an impact in that community, right? When you're doing things that benefit a community that you identify with, that you really want to work with, then it really just does not feel like work. So I made sure to try to figure that out early on in college. And then I made sure to start essay writing and planning out my gap year early. So in the beginning of my senior year, and honestly towards the end of my junior year summer, I made sure that I was planning out exactly how I was going to tackle my gap year and how I was going to allocate time. And this really helped me as I could continue to bolster my application even though I wasn't in school. Okay, now let's move into a timeline of my college experience, and it really started in 2019. Moved from North Carolina to Michigan and Ann Arbor, and I started my undergraduate studies and gymnastics at Michigan. And I was pretty much undeclared in any major, but I had an idea that I might want to do engineering, so I started taking some engineering classes. And then after COVID and we were all kicked off campus, and I came back, and that's when I started engineering. So I got accepted into the engineering school, started biomedical engineering classes, and I also started to find research opportunities, academic clubs, internships, and also service learning opportunities. So I tried my best to stay active and send cold emails and really just accept any kind of position and experience I could get during that COVID year, as it was really hard to come by. And luckily that hard work paid off. So I was able to do research for a semester, and I got an internship with Medtronic. This was really helpful for me, not for the pre-med side, so say, but it really told me that industry might not be where I want to work in. Engineering, even though I love the study of it, might not be for me. I also found adaptive gymnastics, and this grew to be one of the strong points in my application, and honestly, something that I've really cherished ever since. Working with children with disabilities is something that I really enjoy. It comes from my family background, as my sister has a disability, and I've really promoted adaptive gymnastics and inclusive gymnastics ever since. So I made sure to look around for what community service options were out there and narrowed into something that I really enjoyed. And I really recommend doing that. Try early, find what opportunities that are out there, and find something that really does resonate with you. 2022 was a busy year, but then by the end of 2022, so I'm finishing my junior year, I was named president of adaptive gymnastics and co-captain of the gymnastics team, which was huge experiences for me because this was my time to learn how I work as a leader and honestly display leadership at stressful levels. And then I also had an internship with Eli Lilly, and this fortified my decision to be pre-med. I loved working in Indianapolis and at Eli Lilly, but it really showed me that I am set on pre-med and industry isn't quite for me. So I actually took my MCAT at the end of this summer. So I studied through this time period, and I'll go through my whole schedule on how I was able to manage the job, gymnastics, and the MCAT. It was a brutal summer, but I got through it, and it really set me up for success. And so senior year, I started early working on my experiences, planning out my gap year because I had realized at the time, oh, okay, so I need to take a gap year. I actually didn't know after junior year that I wouldn't be able to apply. I didn't realize the cycle started so early. So at this point, started planning out my gap year, started figuring out what I need to do. And then I graduated from the University of Michigan, and I actually traveled through Asia for 45 days, and I sent my application in overseas. A lot of interviewers asked me about this trip. I included it on secondaries and some of my primary. And honestly, I definitely recommend you explain travel. They love talking to me about travel, and I'm an adoptee, so it was my first time in Asia since my adoption. Once I returned, I started working on my secondaries as I did not pre-write much. I was overseas. I also started scribing and working on nonprofit work to continue bolstering my application. I started to receive interview invites in about September, and then I finished my last interview in January, and then I eventually ended up getting accepted into NYU and selecting NYU. So that's really the timeline to where I am now, and at this point, I am finishing up work and taking a little time to relax before I start my journey. All right, so for my top experiences, the things that I wrote most about and really talked about most in the interviews was my 17-year gymnastics career. Being a team captain was huge, and everything that really made my core identity came from the sport. And then anyone who's a gymnast can understand it is very time consuming. So you learn a lot about yourself and honestly the world through the sport. So next was adaptive gymnastics. So this was hugely influential to my decision to go to medical school. Honestly, if I didn't do this, I probably would have still selected industry. But working with other kids and seeing the relationships that I was creating with each student really did direct me towards medical school over industry. Next is both my internships. So Eli Lilly and Medtronic both were great internships. They really did help me rule out engineering. And I know it sounds like bad, but it really did show me that, I could help a lot of people in medical industry, but it still wouldn't be fulfilling. And I could work on a lot of analytical things and it still wouldn't quite compensate for that in-person interaction I was looking for. Lastly was Scribe America. So I did Scribe. I didn't have much shadowing experience in undergrad with athletics and engineering, but Scribe America really helped me get a feel for orthopedics and really just understand the role of a physician better. As I was doing this during my gap year, so I kind of wrote about it and updated schools during the gap year with this experience. And I definitely recommend for your gap year, take this time to fill out more holes, right? If adcoms are seeing that you're continually working on you as a person and working on your application, this is going to look good to them and they're going to have things to ask you about during the interview. All right, so that's all 5 of those experiences there. Now, let's go into the do's and don'ts for heading into the application process in general. So starting with the do's, have a variety of experiences, okay? So one thing that helped me is I evaluated the holes that existed in my application, which were heavily researched and shadowing, and I aimed to address them in my gap year. And this really helped because I was able to do both during my gap year. And I think this really helped show that I understand where I'm lacking and I'm working on it, right? And I had something that I could directly address and tell adcoms that I was doing to work on. Next, I picked a personal project to work on. So definitely recommend investigating other things. And this helped pull me away from, just the grind of maybe like tutoring and stuff like that, and gave me something that would help my application without feeling like work. And this was continuing to work with adaptive gymnastics. Next, make sure to set personal deadlines for emails and essays. You're going to fall behind if you don't do this. And this helps you to ensure that you're pushing forward at all times. And I also spent a little extra time with my family. But for more of the specific do's on this slide, a wide variety of experiences is huge. As I mentioned, fill in your holes, evaluate your experiences, and having that wide variety is going to look better for medical schools. They're going to understand that you're more sure about this decision. I did not have the most traditional route as I didn't really work in a wet lab. Like organic chem lab was done my second semester of my senior year, but I felt like evaluating that year and understanding that I had holes and I needed to film during my gap year, I think that really did help my chances of getting into medical school. I also built a large social network through clubs and just meeting alumni, and they offered such good advice along the way. Pretty much my whole process of medical school, I only got help from alums, and that was really the backbone of, how I got to where I am today. Next, due to athletics, I was very organized and I made sure things were done high quality and on time. And this is so important. It really allows you to stay ahead of the game and make sure that you are always never having to stress and do something at a lower quality. And then lastly, with the internships, I was able to investigate other medical fields. And this really did confirm my belief that I wanted to do this and I was ready to do it. Next, I kind of wanted to mention the don'ts or things I would not recommend doing. And that goes into starting to track experiences late. You want to make sure you're doing this early so you know where you should be putting your time. If you are thinking about what you want to get done freshman year, you're going to do great. You're going to get all your experiences in. I didn't start till, finishing junior year. And for the 2 years I had, it ended up being earlier than a lot of my, acquaintances and fellow classmates who started later and then still had holes. So make sure you do it as early as possible. If it is, your senior year when you start to do that, that's okay. Just go ahead and start right then, right? If you start mapping early, then you can start attacking that application holes early. And especially if you have a gap year or two, right? Then you can really easily address them. Although I found holes in my application at a good time, I do wish I did it earlier and analyzed them. I really do consider how much I could have accomplished if I did this early, or if I had, a community to help, give me guidance throughout my whole my 4 years of undergraduate studies. And that's really what MedLeague's for. And we'll talk about that later. Another thing is, I wish I spent time on better research. So don't just do research for a checklist item, okay? Make sure you're seeking out a variety of labs and stuff that you're interested in, because you're going to get way better research out of it, and you're going to feel way more committed to that research and getting things published, and because your heart's in it. The labs that I was able to consider and partake in during my undergrad definitely weren't quite aligned with our main interest, and I could tell I just didn't get much out of it because my heart was never really in it. Even though applicants, range into their late 20s, remember that becoming a physician is a long road, and it takes, over a decade. A lot of it, you're not getting paid. So don't only do shadowing or unpaid clinical work. Get paid for it. Scribe, medical assistant. This is ways that you can get clinical hours, understand the role of a physician, and also just get paid. It's a very expensive process. So definitely recommend starting and getting training done early. You won't regret it later in your undergraduate when you're an upperclassman. And then don't use vacations or summers just for vacations. You'll regret it. Your vacations, please take them in the summer. But if you have a full summer, right, you should be utilizing this to increase your experiences, to take your MCAT, to take extra classes if you get behind, right? Your summers are a valuable time where you can still bolster your application without going a million miles per hour. So definitely take advantage of your summers. And that is all for the application overview.